something's gone wrong with the music industry. And I don't mean that in a vague music was better in my day way, because guys, I'm 19. There's just structural, financial, and cultural aspects to the system that don't work. And to cut to the chase, the biggest problem in the music industry is that it's not a system that creates and forms new artists, new sounds, new movements or subcultures, or barely anything that's celebrated only a few years later, or at least celebrated in the same way that music from 40, 50 years ago is today, like Michael Jackson's, Fleetwood Mac's, or Queen's. If we take that to be one of the key functions of the industry, it's definitely doing a lot worse than it used to, because bands are quitting before they even start to think about recording music. Talented young musicians are choosing other careers, and the ones that do push through are largely doing it at a financial loss, with no guarantee that it ever changes. And even the ones that do end up making it often never get propelled into the stratosphere of global popularity in the same way that artists did only a few decades ago. At this point, you're probably asking why. So today, I'm going to take you through a deep dive into that topic. And as the thumbnail of this video suggests, unfortunately, this mainly revolves around funding and money, but not really in the way that people often make it out to be. We're going to look at the deeper aspects of the system and how the distribution of funding, especially for young artists, and how this all has completely changed. So buckle up, grab a coffee, and let's get into the real reasons why new music is dying. Let's start with talking about record labels, because despite all their flaws and all the horror stories of how they didn't treat so many known artists well enough or didn't pay them as much as they deserved, labels used to perform the crucially important role of funding the music. They would sign an artist, give them a budget, put them in a proper studio, pay for producers, pay for the video, and pay for the press campaign. Later, someone would organize a tour, design the merch, album covers, bands' outfits, shoot photos for posters, and the list goes on and on and on. This was all overlooked and kept in check by absolute professionals in each and every aspect. Studio engineers who operated millions of dollars worth of equipment, vocal coaches, professional camera workers, directors, photographers, marketing experts, managers, etc. And in return, they took a huge cut of the earnings, of which the artists might have never gotten to see if they weren't successful enough, and they often own the masters. Fine, that's a separate conversation. But the point is, the funding was there and the infrastructure existed. In theory and in practice, a working class kid with no savings could get picked up, funded, and heard at the very least. And to be frank, this is how music has mostly been created throughout the ages. Composers from several centuries ago, like Mozart, could create music because they had patrons. This was often the church or royalty who would commission the work for a certain purpose and pay the composer up front. And these patrons paid a lot of money, effectively funding the project, because the composer was a musical expert. And why were they a musical expert? Not just because they had talent, but because someone funded their studies, something extremely exclusive at the time. And they composed something that would please the patron. And back to today, that model where someone established who has the money, like the church, royalty, or a record label in more modern contexts, actually funds the music has largely collapsed. But hold on a second, I can hear you. Some of you might be saying that I just told you a second ago that record labels could in theory take a working class kid with no savings and turn them into this big pop star. Is that not true anymore? Well, something has changed, and that's the common requirements you need to actually get picked up by a label. Today, in the 2020s, record labels don't work exactly the same as they did in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s. They now want artists who have already built a following and have a proven audience before they start working with them. That's when the professionals come in and get funded to make this new sensation polished and marketable. And the main problem for young artists before they actually get picked up is that you're often just a teenager in your bedroom with a budget instrument, an iPhone, GarageBand, and almost no idea of how music is done up to professional standards. And those professional standards involve tight compositions, understanding how to perform music very well in a recording on all instruments and parts, of course, having the right harmony and melody in your music, recording it professionally, mixing and mastering it. Oh yeah, and don't forget, this all has to be done to an equivalent level of people who have likely studied each of these different components as a degree. How so? Even though you might be someone with no experience or knowledge, everyone expects you to get popular in a world that takes those production standards for granted ever since recorded music was a thing that would get sold to the public. This is just a standard because before GarageBand, when music was released as a physical product, be it vinyl, cassette tape or CDs, it wasn't possible to release it from your house unless you had a professional studio in your house and actually were a professional who would be able to create and market and sell that physical product. So most people are totally used to consuming music done up to the industry standard that they've always been purchasing, that was made by pros, rather than just consuming raw recordings. As said, looking back to the good old days or the most profitable era of the music industry, artists' production processes would be overlooked or managed by, quite often, an ingenious maverick of a producer with ultimate expertise, attention to detail, and panache few people on the planet actually possessed. They would by all means have a clear understanding of the character and nature of your creativity, and in turn would be able to convey it into a gold standard industry product that would be equally as compelling as it would be irresistible to an audience. So what's incredibly daunting for young artists out there today is that the standards we've just talked about them having to compete with is just for the music alone, before the conversation about videoing and releasing content is even started. And talking about content, if you find this video interesting, do consider leaving a like and subscribing. I'm only at around 600 subs at the moment, so it genuinely means a lot. Back to the video, all those production standards have a cost, and spoiler alert, it's not small. So considering all the requirements you need in a way to get signed, at least most of the time, it's inevitable today that artists are expected to fund themselves through the hardest and arguably the most expensive part of their careers, the beginning, with often little to no support. And even though there are so many cool influencers out there who have actually managed to make it on their own with a really basic setup, most of those who try often make it nowhere. Because it's one thing to be a great content creator and another to be a great musician, let alone artist at the same time. Juggling those two together makes it even harder. And it's a whole other thing trying to do it today, where the internet is totally saturated with music and content creators all trying to shine, 90% of which have 4K cameras, a laptop they can easily edit with, and competition that have watched all the how to be a great content creator videos out there. And just for reference and as a reminder, shockingly, only about 8% of channels on YouTube even reach 1,000 subscribers, which of course is a great achievement in itself, but undoubtedly is still very far from being big or noticeable on the internet. And on YouTube alone, there are between 3 and 20 million videos uploaded daily. Essentially, to put it into perspective, with this oversaturation, as a young musician, your work can feel like it has no input in the world of music. And with viewers overstimulated by a seemingly infinite array of top quality music out there for them to listen to at any time, as well as content creators they could listen to talking about or making content about music, your output might not just feel like something worthless like tap water, it could even get taken as a waste of time. That's why I understand why so many artists end up giving up. Learning to become a pro musician and an influencer simultaneously can be incredibly overwhelming to a young person, and then later comparing oneself to brain rot content while something you may have worked on for months gets almost no attention can be utterly disheartening. And the crazy thing about music and the music industry, even back in the good old days, is how almost any given decent or very good song can actually flop on its initial release, but then sometimes when it's freshened up, made again, it can end up as a #1 hit. This is literally exactly what happened to the song I Love Rock and Roll, which I think was initially released in 1975 by The Arrows and ended up as a complete flop. But then in 1981 it was taken up by Joan Jett and it was #1 on the US charts for 7 weeks. So with this thought about the modern music industry, I'm actually scared to think of how many bangers we've lost due to people giving up. The modern world of music promotion is like night and day to the old one, where someone could be slapped on MTV or Top of the Pops and get exposed to millions of music fans in the nation. Because back then there were only a handful of channels that people would often watch. Everyone was watching your face at the same time on the TV. After which, if they liked the music they heard in the program, guess what? The only way to hear more of it was for them to walk to the shop and buy it. This not only generated something that's a bit of an alien concept in the modern music industry, which is this very weird business concept called profit. But even in terms of the way things were being done, there weren't things like direct hate comments or DMs. I mean, I'm not saying that you can get a bad review of your album, say in a magazine, or that someone couldn't write a nasty letter to you and send it, but I just mean that those things didn't appear on something like your phone that you check multiple times per day. And there was also no need to beg for people to like your videos or watch till the end. And probably, even though there were different stresses, that was probably more gentle on an artist's well-being. Someone managed and directed their PR and kept them safe, comparing to all the friction you could potentially go through on social media platforms, especially if someone touches an unexpected or somewhat controversial topic. And of course, with the thing of being put on the one music channel that everyone's watching at the same time, when an artist was lucky enough to get on there, they didn't particularly have to worry about view counts, which a lot of people can mistake with the value or how good their work actually is. Even for me personally, with my covers, more of which are on my other channel, I do all the music myself apart from drums most of the time. And that's a job for about 4 band members, involving learning the parts, recording them, trying to put my own creative take on a song, then I mix it and kind of master it up to the standards you need for YouTube, plan the video, record the video, edit the video, and end up getting something like 1,000 views. Streaming and how it broke the economics. So what is it that didn't just ruin but inverted the economics of the music business into something that's not only worthless sometimes, but can often end up as something that you lose money on? Well, I've already hinted at it by talking about social media, but it's impossible to overlook the impact of streaming services. And yeah, almost everyone uses something like Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, so this absolutely isn't a call to stop it or anything like that. But as most people are aware today, unlike consumers purchasing music on a physical medium, streaming is something from which musicians and artists tend to earn fractions of a penny, until the streaming number goes to 6 figures. I think the literal payout of streams sits around 1/3 of a penny, not per listen for someone who loves your music and bought your album, per individual stream shared by the label, the distributor, the songwriter if there was one, and then the artist, who often ends up with a fraction of that fraction. So to make the minimum wage from Spotify alone, you'd need something in the region of 4 to 5 million streams per year. So clearly not a sustainable income. And to top all of this, Spotify has recently been promoting AI artists onto its platform. So not only has physical music revenue been replaced, human musicians are competing for space with fake music on the platforms that were supposed to make their music more accessible to listeners. And sometimes even on the listener's side, unscrupulous individuals set up bots to stream their AI songs, sometimes racking up millions in revenue, so that can effectively steal money from the already small pool of funds paid by subscribers. And the thing is, the payout was already deemed terrible before that was a problem. The money that used to circulate in the music ecosystem, from fan to record shop to label to artist, has completely dried up. And I mean, at some point, we need to question the ethics of this. I mean, just imagine if you went to work and all you got was people walking past you, looking at you, and then either giving a thumbs up and moving on, or a thumbs down and some big criticism just yelling at you. Imagine that was the only form of pay that you got. Would you want to carry on with that job, let alone be able to sustain yourself? Thus, it's not unreasonable to ask, where do the funds for new music even come from? Because if it's really as bad as I'm making it out to be, surely no one would be here at all, right? Well, the honest answer right now is that the money comes from people who already have the money. Ta-da! A while ago I came across a video by Rick Beato on my feed, which I'll link below, and the title of it really made me think why only rich kids make it in the music industry. And even without watching the video, if you just think about it, it's actually hard to argue with that, especially acknowledging what's actually required to make it, which includes potentially years of unpaid work, equipment, studio time, producers, music videos, the success of which is at bordering odds of winning the lottery. You also have to be able to sustain yourself financially while you build an audience that might never come, and also touring at a loss before anyone would really book properly. This is the reality of an industry that has no money in it. And let's be real, who can actually afford all of that? People with a safety net. People who at least have parents who can help cover the cost of living while they have the chance to work it out. And what about the working class kid who has real talent? They need to pay the same cost, but they can't spend 5 years building a brand. So more often than not, they stop and do something else, and we lose out on whatever could have been made. Even the Clash in the 1970s only pretended to be squatters. We built a system that selects for financial comfort over talent. And then people scratch their heads wondering why so much of the charts feels like something that's disconnected from real life. But hold. We've built this? How are you and me part of this? This isn't our fault, right? Here's where I want to bring it a bit closer to home, because it's easy to point at labels, streaming platforms, as well as the crazy high expectations and standards that all pressure young musicians. And yeah, all of that is very real and worth being annoyed about. But sometimes we should ask ourselves, and that includes myself as well, when was the last time I actually supported a new artist? Went to see a new band in a small venue, bought a record from someone who actually needs the $10, bought some merch for someone who only has 400 monthly listeners but is actually doing something really cool, not streamed them for free, actually supported them. And that doesn't count the Taylor Swift t-shirt that you bought for your teenager. She's been famous since 2006. She's doing fine, guys. I'm talking about people who are trying to build something from nothing. Older music fans who have disposable income, grew up with vinyl and genuinely lived through the era of music that they kept saying is better. They're spending hundreds, if not thousands, on the Rolling Stones or Oasis reunion tickets. Which fine, nostalgia is real and should be enjoyed. And there are many young people out there who genuinely prefer that music too. But in a way, it can be a little ironic when people from a generation that cherish authenticity and real music don't really want to take a punt on anything new. And then wonder why young people don't want to start bands or pursue music, and wonder why there's comparably so little new quality music being made. If hardly anyone wants to support new artists, hardly any new artists will push forward, publish their music, or even dream of making it. So yes, the structural changes to the industry have definitely broken it in many ways, but the audience does play a role in it as well, which I don't want to point out in some accusatory way. But unfortunately, in real life, when the maths doesn't add up, people don't tend to defy gravity and randomly make it without the boost that they really need. Now, someone's gonna say in the comments, but you can just record all your music at home. You don't need a lot of money to do that. Anyone can do it, and technology has sorted it all out. And look, up to a point, yes, bedroom recording is better than it ever has been. I make my own covers literally in my own bedroom, and people on my other channel have even questioned whether I don't get help from professionals, which I take as a massive compliment. But one thing we need to be honest about is the ceiling. You want to recreate a Queen album or something with a real brass section, the sound of analog tape, echo chambers, that real sound that fills a room. Your laptop and a digital audio workstation isn't that. Even though there are great simulations, MIDI instruments, plugins, and ways to try recreate that real studio vibe, it's not the equivalent. That's why even though a lot are closing, you still have music studios today. Even though things like Logic Pro are fantastic for what they are. And in a way, what really is the crux of the issue is that even though the tools got cheaper and more convenient, the knowledge and expertise that you need to use them doesn't come as an extra plug into your brain. Even in my case, where I make my own covers in my bedroom, I studied music and music technology when I was 16, so in a way I already had a head start compared to other people who might be starting out and learning it for themselves on their own. This was actually done with the thought that in the future I would want to have a music YouTube channel and be able to do what I'm doing right now. And as said, beyond making music, you've got a whole separate mountain. Trends, video editing, hooks, and content strategy. The music alone is not enough anymore. And when you're expected to be a musician, a marketer, a content creator, all at the same time, it can feel like a really daunting task to a young person. So maybe it's not a coincidence that genres like folk music or music played acoustically is having its moment, because frankly, that's the only type of music you can completely recreate in a home environment. But yeah, in terms of music that uses popular instruments like synths, electric guitars, proper drum sets, which, fun fact, use up to 16 mics to record, some of which can cost thousands of dollars each, and yeah, other grander instruments too, like an acoustic or even grand piano, a string orchestra, brass, and even the saxophone, which at some point in time was in so many popular songs. The thing is, someone actually had to play that sax or the whole string orchestra or the grand piano or create the synth sounds, and more likely than not, it wasn't one artist on their own. Labels or studios would pay loads of money for session musicians to come in and add some grandeur to that project. It was only a few decades ago when labels and artists were paying millions for albums. I think even one of Michael Jackson's albums cost him like $30 million to make, which is just insane thinking about it today. You really need much more than a small budget to make a music career. And unfortunately, it really is the case that when there's no money, there's no honey. And if you don't believe me, just look at what's happening with new acts in the music industry. And that should just confirm what I mean. So now that the record labels stopped taking risks, streaming platforms started replacing artists with AI, and even people who want more authentic, real music from real musicians, from real young artists, often aren't interested in supporting them. In many ways, apart from consuming their music, the cultural infrastructure that used to help bring about new music has largely collapsed, and it's clearly evident that nothing really replaced it properly. This is why we have a deficit of young artists. As said, even people that crave music that isn't a manufactured project by record labels don't often feel moved to help fund the newbies. Audiences have gradually stopped showing up for anything new. As said, no money, no honey. And until someone finds a solution to, frankly, this depressing, disheartening rut, we might end up living through the musical dark ages. So if you really care about music having a future, maybe try to find something new this week or month. A small venue, a Bandcamp or Patreon for a cool artist, or just something where your $8 actually reaches a person. Because new music doesn't survive by adding it to someone's playlist. It survives because real people decide it's worth paying for, voting with real coins. So to wrap this up, I'd genuinely love to know your thoughts on this in the comments. And if you want more of this kind of thing, covers, vlogs, music discussions, or general music grievances, feel free to subscribe if you found this interesting and want more. That'll be it for today, so I'll see you in the next one. Bye!